China-US trade tensions are back in the spotlight. Confusing statements on the fate of their trade deal have sent markets on a roller coaster. But US President Donald Trump says the trade pact is fully intact.
It was really interesting to me.
White House trade advisor Peter Navarro said that the trade deal with China was over. He blamed the breakdown on China's failure to warn the U.S. about the dangers of COVID-19 earlier. Mr. Navarro, a staunch China critic, claimed the U.S. only learned about the virus after Beijing's delegation signed the trade agreement and left Washington in January. A few hours later, he quickly walked back on these remarks, saying his comments had been taken out of context. Mr. Navarro stressed that the deal continues to be in place, and that he was speaking about the lack of trust they have in the Chinese Communist Party, as he claims they lied about the origins of the coronavirus. In a firm defense of the trade deal, President Donald Trump also tweeted that the pact with China remains fully intact. He said he hopes they live up to the terms of the agreement. Relations between Washington and Beijing have hit an all-time low over the origins of the COVID-19 virus, as well as Hong Kong's upcoming national security law. Under the Phase 1 trade deal, Beijing promised to purchase $200 billion worth of U.S. goods. But because of COVID-19, China has been lagging in this target.
For the latest on out of Washington, D.C., Simon Marks joins us live. Simon, we've seen mixed messages. What's going on with all of these mixed messages, if you like, coming out from the White House?
Very difficult to know, Steve. I mean, Peter Navarro's answer to the question was unequivocal. It's over, he said, of China trade negotiations, and that was taken by the financial markets to be a very clear indication that the Trump administration was walking away from any hopes of expanding on even the first phase of the trade agreement that was struck. President Trump then put a tweet out walking back what Peter Navarro had said, insisting that the China trade deal was intact and that he expects China to live up to every aspect of the Phase 1 agreement. Mr. Navarro, no stranger, it has to be said, to speaking first and then wondering in detail later about what he said, put out a statement saying that he was quoted out of context, that the remarks were taken out of context. But if you listen back to them, the context is absolutely clear. There are some skeptics wondering if all of this was an attempt by the Trump administration somehow to test the waters, see how the financial markets would react to what would be, were it to be the case, very, very dramatic news.
Simon, you mentioned there about testing the waters, but some U.S. officials have challenged China's compliance with the trade pact. Do Mr. Trump's advisors want him to scrap the deal?
Well, look, there's no question that inside the White House, President Trump is hearing the private thoughts of Peter Navarro, never mind the public thoughts of Mr. Navarro, plus the views of other less hawkish figures in terms of this negotiation, including the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, who has been at pains over the last couple of years to keep President Trump on the straight and narrow through all of the various trade negotiations that he has embarked upon. So there are definitely voices telling President Trump it's time to walk away. The president, as we've seen in the last few hours, still seems reluctant to grasp that particular nettle fully, even as publicly he rails against China and accuses it of having responsibility for the distribution of COVID-19 and its arrival here in the United States. So we're waiting to see, as this election campaign in the US proceeds, is President Trump going to continue trying to walk that tightrope of blaming China for things, but at the same time saying, well, I really want to keep this trade agreement going? Or at some point, will we hear him reflecting the cadences that we heard Peter Navarro articulating within the last few hours?
And Simon, on another issue, US police continue to crack down on Black Lives Matter protests across the country. Why has Mr. Trump supported such a heavy police deployment when he pledged police reforms just last week?
Well, President Trump seems to believe that he should not politically be allowing any daylight to slip in between himself and his support for law enforcement all over the country. And the president, even as he was signing that executive order on police reform, was arguing that, in fact, what he was trying to do was enforce best practices with regard to police training. There was no suggestion, for example, that executive order was going to make police less immune from prosecution for criminal acts or do anything to strip the ability of America's 18,000 police forces to acquire military-grade weapons. So the executive order itself was a half step towards what activists are calling for, which is meaningful police reform, and in many cases calling for police forces across the country to be defunded. But also what we're seeing underscores the fact there are 18,000 different police forces across the country, and they don't report to President Trump. They report to their own jurisdictions. So there are limits to what the president can do to condition the behaviour of individual forces all over the country.
Well, thanks for that. Simon Mark speaking to us from Washington.